Hallelujah.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the In Faith Podcast. My name is David. As always, I'm joined here by Steve.
I'm glad to be here.
And last week, Steve, we started a brand new series, you could call it, or a new story. Finished up with Moses and got into the story of Naaman. Now, just to recap that a little bit, the story of Naaman's really interesting because I find a lot of habits of Naaman that we could fall into, or it's very easy to fall into in our walks today, and it's one that I could really relate to in my past and even present. It's the characteristic of um, taking that first step of faith with stubbornness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see with Naaman here. So, long story short, to recap it up, Naaman was a man that was held with high regard from the kingdom. He had won a huge battle, had many victories under his belt. He came with high regard by the king. He held a high position, but there was one problem with Naaman, and that he was leprous. He was a leper. So, we've talked about this on a few different occasions and a few different studies. Leprosy was a skin disease, correct? Yeah. So, and it's worth noting that this skin disease was incurable at the time.
Yeah.
There was no treatment for it. There was no way to get rid of it. If you had it, everybody steered clear of you because of the severity, how contagious it was, and then also, um, or the fear of contamination, or if that's the right word. Um, but no doctor at the time knew how to cure it or even treat it. So if you had leprosy, you were kind of the outcast, steer clear. It's and there wasn't a lot that could be done about it. So when it did, in those cases that it did get healed and it did get cured, it was all an act of what God could do. It was all a miracle that was performed by Jesus, or a miracle that was performed by others that God had used and appointed in that situation.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note here is that Naaman was a Syrian, so he's not Israel, and him having the high position that he had wouldn't even happen if he was in Israel. The
Right.
laws concerning how to deal with a leper were laws that God had given people, like you said, to keep from catching it. It was a very communicable disease. So God gave very specific rules concerning leprosy.
Mhm.
And yeah, as you mentioned, for Israel, if you had leprosy, you were outside the camp. Anytime you came near people, you had to let them know that they should still clear, that you were unclean. But in Syria, they didn't have those laws. So in Syria, he's able to be this commander of armies, even though he has leprosy. So that's just a little difference there, based on where he is. So he's in a high position, one that wouldn't even be possible for him if he were in Israel, but he's in Syria.
Right. Well, and so with that in mind, um, he finds out that there might be some hope for him, but he finds out from his maid, a servant girl that they had, that was brought back from that same war in the place that he now has to go back to in order to even in order for this to even be a possibility.
Yeah, the Bible says that this maid to his wife, to Naaman's wife, was captured by a raiding party into Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So he hears from a servant girl from Israel that had been captured. So God is working. His voice is coming through the lowest of the people through the eyes of Naaman,
Right.
a very low position. Um, and yet, because of his desperation, he's willing to listen.
He's willing to listen, and he gives it the attention, but not fully. So it's like he's willing to do it, much like, a lot of us try to do. Well, we're okay. Well, we're willing to take that step, but on our conditions. And that was the drawback in Naaman's case, though he was willing to take the advice. He wasn't willing to take the remedy. So instead of going on this mission through faith, he packed a bunch of silver and gold and the currency at the time. I think we read somewhere around the number of like $500,000 worth or something like that, and figured that that would be enough to convince this doctor, who actually isn't a doctor at all, is a prophet, um, to cure him. And he thought that was gonna be enough to kind of persuade him to give him this cure that didn't exist at the time.
Yeah, I guess I sort of think of him as having this tiny grain of faith, right? Because he's clearly gone through all of his options in Syria. For him to listen to what this little Hebrew maid has to say, and to get his king to write a letter to the king of Israel, for him to go, this is showing some faith in that he believes there's somebody
Right.
that can cure him. Now, his faith, I think your point is his faith is not in God at this point.
Right.
His faith is that there's a man that knows how to cure, and he's going to find that man and he's going to pay him
Mm-hmm.
and get cured. And I think one of the things I think we find ourselves when we first come to Christ, we're new believers. All we know is the world.
Right.
And we try to do the work of Christ in a worldly way often.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not God's way. And it takes time, it takes our faith to grow to find out how we depend on God to do his work rather than depend on ourselves.
It really does, because I think if I were to put myself in that time, in that era, and in Naaman's shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. Here you have a man that is held in high regard. Um, Finances, money's not much of an issue for him. We see that by how much he took, and at this point, I get this image that because he's going out there with a letter from the king, and with a recommendation of, well, I forgot what it was called, like a recommendation of passing, or something along those lines. He almost has this idea that it's his stature that's giving him favor and not the faith in God. Now, when the servant gives him this information, she's not holding back. At least I don't get the impression that she's holding back that this is a prophet and that God's going to be doing, is the one that can do the healing. And but when he gets there, he travels in style. He gets there when he's expecting this like huge grand entrance, and especially with that letter that he has. And when he gets there, he sees that the red carpet isn't rolled out for him, right? He sees that there's not a big crowd of people giving him this nice warm welcome. And when he notifies the king that he's there, he's kind of brought with this this response that's completely in the opposite direction of what he's expecting. So I'm trying to find this place. So yeah, bringing with him the kingly credentials, he expected this distinguished reception, but instead of the king rushing out to meet him, when he heard Naaman's arrival and purpose, he simply tore his clothes and asked, "Am I God to kill and to give life? That this man sends to me, or this man sends to me to remove leprosy. Therefore, now consider how he seeks a quarrel against me." We find that in 2 Kings 5:7. So the king's really not that king. This isn't the same king that, wrote him the letter and gave him the credentials. This is um,
The king of
the
Israel.
king of Israel. Yeah, I don't know why that escaped my mind there, but he was expecting this, grand entrance and this big welcome, and instead he got, well, what am I supposed to do about it?
Which
So yeah, he
seems
arrived in.
seems odd to me a bit too, right? Because he's responsible for sending raiding parties
Yeah,
into Israel. Um, I'm thinking he needed that letter to not be attacked.
and that's what I'm thinking too. And then
So
he still kind of expected this
yeah,
grand entrance, you know, but we kind of overlook a little bit, or it's easy to overlook that this city was just raided by him and his army,
yeah,
and he takes these credentials with him and thinks that that's going to give him the same high stature. And really, it's like, well, is it giving you a high stature, or is it protecting you at this point? Yeah, you're right. Because it's like, I know there's no reason why this king wants anything to do with him. So
right,
he's like, yeah, why would he send him to me?
yeah. And I guess, like you said, with the mindset of um, believing that if you've got someone in your kingdom who's able to cure leprosy, you are going to profit off of this. He's in belief that this king would very well know someone who's going to be able to cure leprosy, and this king would be getting his portion out of the money they can make off of curing leprosy
Hmm.
because, like you mentioned, it was uncurable at the point. So Naaman's mind is still in the idea that man is doing this, that somehow a man figured out how to cure leprosy. Even though, like you said, the girl flat out said there's a prophet in Samaria that could heal you. She put it in those words, and he's thinking, yeah, it's the prophet that heals me. When clearly it's God doing the healing, and prophets only speak
Right.
what God tells them to speak and do what God tells them to do. But yeah, so Naaman is thinking that this is a very worldly system.
Hmm.
He's going to go in. He's got all this money. He's going to have to give the king something just to get to see this guy. And then he's going to have to pay this guy to get cured. So he's expecting a big deal out of it. He's expecting it to be the worldly ways of doing things.
Yeah. Well, and if that initial reaction didn't humble him at that time, it gets better. Not it gets better as in his welcoming gets better, it, but the humbling continues,
Yeah.
because when he realized that nobody seemed to be coming out to greet him when he got there, he sent his message in, and it says, "Tell the prophet that Major General Naaman of Syria has arrived and wishes to see him." So when he realized that nobody was coming out, he sent a message in, but he sent it to me in a way that's like, oh well, let me establish my credentials to give the image of the severity and stature of who's here to see him.
Yeah.
And so he sends his message in, tell the prophet that Major General Naaman of Syria has arrived and wishes to see him. But Elijah is spelled Elisha. It is Elijah, not to be confused with the other Elijah. This Elisha. Took it very calmly. He didn't come out to see Naaman as Naaman requested. He he as soon as he heard Naaman's errand, or he heard of Naaman's errand, he sent his servant to tell him what to do. So he didn't even come out to see him.
Right? It's like no offense, but he sent his nurse practitioner
Yeah.
out to help him, and Naaman very much expected to
Yep.
be able to see the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
the prophet himself. But Naaman also, I'm not sure he understands how he even got there.
Right.
Like the
Not
king of
yet.
Israel doesn't have any kind of in with the prophet. Like the king of Israel and the prophet really aren't friends. So so Elisha has to send a notice to the king saying, "Hey, why are you tearing your clothes? Just send them to me."
Mm-hmm.
So it's because the prophet somehow knew that he was coming and that he was there and sent a message to the king. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten there at all, right? The prophet Elisha is the one that has caused him to get there. And Elisha knows everything that happens is for the glory of God. And so now he's here, like you're saying. And Elisha's just like, I'll send my servant out and tell him what he
Mm-hmm.
needs to do.
Yeah, I did jump ahead a little bit, it seems, because yeah, he did that. That is how he got there. It wasn't Elisha. He heard of the king's trouble and sent him a message. Just like you said, why are you tearing your clothes? Just send him to me.
Yeah.
But then again, this is the second time that Naaman kind of expects a certain kind of greeting, and instead he
Right.
doesn't even get to see the person he's there to see and address doesn't even come out. But there's reasons behind this. It's not just kind of a turn the back kind of thing. God had orchestrated this, I believe, to because he knew Naaman needed a softer heart in order to be able to receive what God had for him.
Yeah.
And it's the same with us when in times of our walk, our timing doesn't line up with God's timing, and there's a reason for it. And I think a lot of the time, and sometimes that reason is we need a softer heart before we can receive what He
Yeah.
has for us, or else we're not going to receive it the same way as we would have with that softer heart. So I think there's a lot of times we need to be humbled, soften our hearts in order to fully receive what God has for us. And I think that's what's going on here with Naaman.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was picturing, so the person of self importance, shows up at a church and he's immediately saying, I need to see the pastor.
Hmm.
I need to see the pastor. Well, then the grandma behind the welcome center comes over and talks to him. And that grandma is the one that's softening his heart
Hmm.
for Jesus. That grandma is the one that ends up praying for him. The grandma is the one that makes him understand the love of Christ. It flows through her better than it could flow through anyone else. But he's thinking when he walks in that only the pastor would do.
Hmm.
He's got to talk to him. And just as you said, the softening of the heart, the seeing Jesus, the feeling the love of Christ, it comes through people that you don't ever expect it to come through.
Right. And that reminds me of that instance where you could miss the message because the messenger giving it isn't what you expected.
Yeah.
We just got done talking about that a couple of weeks ago, how it's not the messenger, it's the message.
Right.
And this is exactly, and that um, is exactly what it reminds me of. You're expecting this message from the pastor, but yet you're talking to the lady behind the welcome center. Same message, different person, and you could almost miss it like Naaman's doing now
Yep.
because he's expecting, okay, he sends his message in. I'm here to see the prophet, send him out. Instead of the prophet coming out to tell him what to do, he sends the servant out to tell him what to do. The servant comes out and he says, okay, Naaman, go to the Jordan River, dip 7 times, and you'll be clean. Walks away. The message stays the same, whether it was Elisha coming out to tell
Right.
him, Go dip 7 times and you'll be clean. Now think of the um, simplicity to that. You know, the message stays the same, whether it's from the prophet or from the prophet's servant. The message is the same.
Right.
Dip 7 times, you'll be clean. The simplicity of that instruction: go to the Jordan, dip yourself 7 times, leave. You'll be completely clean. Instead of looking at it from a standpoint of simplicity, Naaman gets offended because A, prophet wouldn't come out to see him. Elisha wouldn't come out to see him. He didn't get greeted by the king. He didn't get greeted by the prophet. He got turned away by the king and greeted by a servant. So that took a shot to Naaman's pride a little bit. And he he's I can imagine him just fuming, you know. Uh like what did you say? Dip dip 7 times in the Jordan? And then he's like, you know, why where he's from, the Jordan River is more like a ditch, you know, where he comes from. You know, when we look at the Jordan River, we don't see this like the Jordan River is not what it depicts in other drawings and pictures. It wasn't very clean water, especially from Naaman coming from a kingdom. I'm sure the water quality was a lot greater than the Jordan River. So he's taking offense to it, like, you know, you're expecting me to be clean by jumping into a dirty river and somehow I'm going to come out clean. Well, he's missing the importance of the word clean. You're not taking a shower, you're getting healed.
Yeah, I think he's missing several things, right? He does talk about the rivers in Damascus, where he's from, are so much better than this Jordan River. So in his head, he's thinking that it's qualities in the water that are healing him. And the water has nothing to do with it. It's simply following what God, through the prophet, has called you to do
Hmm.
that brings the healing. It's not about the water, but that's where Naaman's mind is.
Right.
It's about the water.
Yes.
This water cannot possibly heal me. If I could be healed by water, I would have been healed years and years
Oh,
ago.
yeah.
I've been in a bunch of water
Mm.
and I've dipped in all kinds of stuff. You know, I went over to the sulfur springs and the hot springs and got in those waters to try to get healed. But that didn't help me any. And now you're telling me to get in a dirty river 7 times and somehow that water's going to heal me? So that's his mindset. And I think we can all blow it with that kind of worldly mindset. When God calls us to do things that we don't understand,
Hmm.
we're looking so horizontal that we're thinking whatever he's called us to do is what is making the difference. But it's God making the difference. It's our obedience to what he's called us to do that makes a difference. It's not the doing,
Right.
it's the obedience to what he's called us to that makes a difference. Just like it makes no sense to say we need to be generous with our money to be at peace with God and to be doing what he's calling us to do. Because in our mindset, hey, I've given away money before and it's not peaceful because I couldn't pay my bills
Mm.
after I did that, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But God's calling us to use the possession that he's given us for his work. And if we do that, we have peace about it and we know we're doing what he's called us to do, regardless of what struggle may come because of it and the timing, because God does let us struggle through some of that when he calls us to do things. But I think the thing is we can't look horizontally at what God's called us to do as if that action is healing us or giving us peace. It's God who heals. It's God who gives peace.
Well, and to back what you were saying about Naaman in the water, and comparing the two, we find that in Second Kings 5:12, where he says, are the rivers of Damascus not better than all the waters in Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? He's saying that same thing. Like, can I not wash in the cleaner water and be clean? Why does it have to be the dirty water? If water was my cure, I would have been,
Right?
you know, cleaned a long time ago, because I bathe in cleaner water than this, than any water you have in Israel. I've been in that's 10 times better. So he turns away, he storms off, and he turns away in rage, not even entertaining the thought of where this message is coming from. Instead, he focused on the messenger, and all it did is turn him away in rage. And it's like, you know what that kind of reminds me of is like this bad stigma of people getting mad when you tell them the truth. So we've, as a society, tried to pour some sweetener on that truth. And then so much so that it's covering the truth. And it's not a bad sign when, you know, uh, saying here, it's not a bad sign when a man gets mad if you tell him the truth. If the truth is what's making them mad, then we can't do anything about that if it's the truth that God sent. It's not a bad thing if the truth we're giving them is the truth that God sent, and they end up upset about it and storm off like Naaman. We don't know, we don't get to see. In a lot of times today, it's like, okay, well, if that were to make me upset, then I need to focus on what I'm doing that's so convicting that the truth is upsetting me. Because that's what it has to be. It has to be something that's convicting me enough to where I don't want to deal with that, in my opinion. Now, what we're not seeing is, did Naaman storm away um, out of pride or conviction? We don't get to see too much of that, but the fact was that the Jordan never had any great reputation as a river. It does now. It has a lot of history behind it now, but at the time, the Jordan didn't have a great reputation. It flowed into the Dead Sea, and that sea never had a harbor going to it. Its banks were not half as beautiful as the rivers in Damascus. Damascus was probably one of the most beautiful cities in the world at the time. So Naaman turned away in rage and said, "Here I am, a great conqueror, a successful general on the battlefield, holding the very highest rank in the army, and yet this prophet doesn't even come out to meet me. He simply sends a message." He says, "I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God." They see in Second Kings 5:11, he says that he will surely come out to meet me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, ready, his God. Not our God, his God. So to back, what you were saying is he's going off. There's a little bit of faith in him even taking the step to his journey, but none of that faith is in God. He's showing up and saying, "Call upon your God," telling me that his faith in God not quite there. So he's saying, "Call on the name of the Lord, his God, and strike his hand over the place and remove the leprosy." Go ahead.
So I think looking at that, like you're noting, he could miss his healing if he insists on it looking the way he expects it to look. Right now, he's in very much danger of
Hmm.
missing his healing because what he's just been told doesn't look at all like what
Right.
he expects. And when Christ came, as a poor man, as an everyday guy working and having to find a way to live, and then living homeless with his disciples and teaching them. That was not what the Jews had pictured the Messiah coming like.
Right.
They missed their Messiah because he did not come in the way they expected him to come, much like Naaman, they expected him to come as a conquering king. But he came as a suffering servant.
Well, and here's what we need to lean back on. And in those times where we feel like Naaman, and here's a great way to sum up. We can go to Isaiah 55:8. And in that verse, God says, "For my thoughts are not as your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." And that's what it was with Naaman. In the first place, he thought a good big doctor's fee would take care of it and settle everything up. And besides that, he thought, that going to the king with his letters of introduction, that's what it is, letters of introduction, um, would also do it. So he thought his recommendation, his letter of introduction from the king, and this nice hefty doctor's fee would be enough to cover everything, square it away, and he can walk away, completely healed. But that's not how God's ways are. You can't buy your way into his blessings, right? So just like in Isaiah, when God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are my ways your ways," that's telling me that God's plan here, amongst everything else, goes above and beyond what Naaman and any of us are thinking are the ways of this world. Like you stated earlier, he's going about this journey as if it was a business deal. If I give enough, then it'll be worth sparing my illness and curing it. So that's kind of what Naaman was thinking. The here's the doctor's fee, here's my letter from the king. And when it didn't work out, he turned away in rage and disappointment. He thought the prophet would have come out, very humbly
He
and
snubbed
obedient.
him, totally snubbed him.
Yeah, he did. He did. And well, in a sense, to Naaman, yeah, he just got blown off. He thought he was going to come out humble and obedient and you know, ask him to do some great thing, and instead Elisha um didn't even come out, didn't even come to the door, didn't even look out the window. Sent his messenger, but the messenger told him the same, gave him the same message that God had gave the prophet. So again, not the messenger, but the message. Doesn't matter who it came from. These do this in this order, which wasn't this big long list. It was just go to the Jordan, dip 7 times, go home. You'll be clean. And right now, Naaman can't wrap his head around the direction. Instead, he's so focused on the um, offense that he's taking from the lack of greeting, the lack of anybody even caring about his letter, and then the direction of go bathe in a go tip yourself 7 times in waters that are much um, unappealing than waters that you're used to. I don't even think, Steve, it's about the water. I don't think it's about where the water is. I think the way God had the what I'm gathering from it is, again, the humility, the humbleness, the softening of the heart. Sure, you've been in much cleaner waters, but would you be willing to trust the Lord in much more unappealing waters and get a better outcome from what you would in water that's crystal clear?
No, I think you're right on. Has nothing to do with the water. It simply has to do with faith in God. God says this is the way to be healed, then that's the way. And like you just mentioned a minute ago, his ways are higher than our ways. They're not like our ways. We can't understand God's ways, but his ways always have purpose. Like you're saying here, the humility that Naaman needs to gain
Mhm.
feels like it's included in this purpose. So Naaman has to humble himself and dip in the Jordan. We have to humble ourselves before God and have faith when we believe.
Well, and it took another one of his servants
Yeah.
to make him see that perspective a little more clearly.
I think it's interesting too. Who were the people that appear to care the most about Naaman? It's his servants. He's got a servant girl that he took in a raid who cares enough to get a message through her through his wife
Mhm.
that there's a prophet that can cure him. Here we've got servants that, you know, they care enough to calm him down. You know, they could get in trouble for this. What if he doesn't calm down? What kind of trouble are they going to get in for speaking against what he's thinking? So the servant cares enough that he's risking some sort of retribution from Naaman if Naaman so chose to. Yeah. But he's risking it because he cares enough to say, "Hey, why don't we look at this another way?"
Right. Well, and up to this point, I'm thinking stubbornness. I'm thinking being offended. I'm thinking um, things not going the way that he thought it would, and that's why he's so upset, and that's why he leaves. But what his servant tells him next makes me wonder if he thought he was being messed with because it sounded too easy. He thought it couldn't be.
Right.
Much like today, a lot of the a lot of the reasoning I think most of us don't take that first step in Christ is because what we have to do compared to what we've done is too easy. We think that we need to do some big, um, glorious act of service or some honorable sacrifice to get to God. And we don't. The simplicity of just going to Him almost seems like it's too easy compared to what we've done to stray away from Him. So, go ahead.
Well, no, I just a part of me feels like it's not just about simplicity.
Hmm.
I feel like it's also a part of us not wanting to accept a gift. We want to pay for our own. We're going to pay our own way.
Right.
We're going to make sure that we've claimed our salvation and that it's ours because we've made it ours.
We want to feel like we earned it.
And that's no choice. We
Yeah.
don't have that choice. It's like Naaman here. If he wants to get healed, he doesn't have the choice of paying for something to be in control of his own healing.
Right.
It's purely a gift from God that he becomes healed.
Well, and I don't know why we have such a obsession with needing to feel like we've conquered victory. We have this like you said, we have to earn it. We have to do the work for it. We have to be the ones that get ourselves there
Well,
to say that we did.
we don't want to owe anybody anything,
Yeah.
right? We keep lists because we want to make sure that we're evened up and that we don't owe anybody anything. Nobody's holding anything over me.
Yeah.
And by surrendering to God, we're very much
In debt.
admitting that we are his.
Yeah.
There's nothing else to it. We surrender to God or else we don't have any peace. We surrender to God or we never feel his love. We surrender to God or we don't live with him through eternity. That's the way it is. And like you said, it's easy, but that's not because of our fallen nature, that's not the way we want it.
Hmm. Well, and let me tell you guys what we're talking about here. If we continue on in Second Kings 5:13, um, that's what we're talking about here. So now, while Naaman was, kind of wavering in his mind, thinking about what to do, one of his servants um, came to him and made this remark that made more sense than what Naaman was battling between what to do. And he says in Second Kings 5:13, um, he says, "If the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you have not done it? How much then um, would you say, wash and be clean?" And there's a great deal of truth to that. If the prophet had told him to go back to Syria, even on his hands and knees, let's say, crawl 150 miles, we see that he had traveled. Go back to Syria on your hands and knees, crawl back to Syria, he would have done it and thought it was that was good, you know, because he earned it. If he had told him to go into the cave and stay there for a year or two, he would have done it and thought, okay, I earned it. That's what he wants to do, and that's what we want to do so often is earn our way in. And it's not done by an act or service, it's done by grace and mercy. So if he would have told him that it was necessary to have, surgery performed along with um, a lot of pain and recovery, that would have suited him more than go dip 7 times and walk away. Because we can't. I mean, I'm even thinking of the surgery reference. It's like, okay, that makes sense. I have to go to a professional to get something fixed, and it's going to take a long time of being in pain. It's going to take a long time of healing. But once all that's done, I didn't go through all that for nothing. Now I'm fixed. And that's not what Naaman was thinking. He was like, none of this makes sense to go jump into dirty water, and I don't know how dirty per se the water is. I'm just calling it dirty water because com- being compared to what Naaman's comparing it to, it probably looked more dirty than what he's used to. But nevertheless, whether it's water in Damascus, water in Israel, this is the river that God had instructed him that had given the message to instruct him to go and then dip 7 times. But that's why I come thinking with the simplicity. It looked too easy. Didn't make any sense, so he kind of stormed off in rage. But his servant tells him, if the prophet would have told you to do anything that would have led to you deserving or earning it, you would have done it without asking a question. Go conquer this mountain, you know, from this man who had just conquered these raids. He probably would have been like, watch me do this with uh with ease. But no, go do what you've done hundreds of times in other waters in this water and watch it change your life. So I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think we like the thought of having something to do with our salvation, and really we have nothing to do with it at all.
Yeah,
We want to think that we have something to do with it, that we assisted ourselves, I guess, in receiving it, when in all reality we didn't. The only thing that I think that we do on our own is let go. That's the only thing we can say we did, in a sense, because, and I say in a sense because there was so many times I think that I felt like I was going to and did and didn't. It's not those times. So I think even in God's timing, and that time that we surrender is even has a lot to do with where his plan is for us.
yeah,
The other 4 times prior that I wanted to and did get up and did, surrender at an altar call, and nothing really came of it because my heart wasn't in the right place. So it's like, I was doing it. What were the reasons? If my heart wasn't in the right place, it could have been anything. Fill in the blank. I can't go back in my memory and say, "Oh, yeah, time number 3, I just kinda did it to make a point. Time 2, I did it to, appease somebody else." I don't remember, but I know that if it took more than those times, my heart wasn't in the right place until it was.
Yeah, I think of the parable of the sower when you're saying that. You know, one time, your heart might have been in the place to where you wanted this, you wanted to be saved, you knew it was true. But as soon as you gave your heart away and you dove into trying to live like Christ, it was hard, man. And you gave that up in a hurry. And the next time you go up there and you know it's true, you still know it's true, and you go up and you're at the altar and you're saying you're giving your life to Christ. Well, then the cares of the world pop up and they start choking out that faith that you had because you're going to deal with those cares and you're dealing with them on your own. So this parable of the sower could be a progression, and someone like you in their heart, where you see each time, the first time, you're believing fast, but it falls away as soon as life gets hard. The second time you're believing, but then all the problems, instead of going to God, you try to fix them yourself. And then finally, your heart's in a place to where you hear the gospel and you go forward and it takes
Mhm.
and you're there. And maybe, for some people, the progression is not only a change in their heart, but what's changing is also their circumstances. They're going to worse and worse and worse. And by the third time, they're going up.
Right.
They're in desperation,
Uh-huh.
and the type of desperation that Naaman was in when he finally goes to see the prophet.
Well, and I think his servant kind of struck that desperation or made him realize
Yeah.
the point of desperation because he does finally accept the recommendation of his servant, but his servant has to tell him, you're already here. You've come 150 miles. You've come all this way. And instead of going back, not knowing, don't you think you should kind of try it?
Right.
Just try it.
It's just pure logic.
Yeah, the worst that happens, nothing comes of it. You walk away angry, which you already are. But what if? What if you're already here? What's the worst that could happen? What if it actually works? So in time, Naaman accepts, his servant's recommendation. At this point, I think his anger is cooling down. Enough time had passed where he's like, you know what, you might be right. And that was the start. By him accepting the recommendation was the start of his faith. And although he still kind of thought it was foolish to dip in the Jordan River and um, he couldn't bring himself to believe that it would actually heal him, by following the prophet's instructions, at least to start, Naaman's will was conquered and he surrendered just by that first step. Okay, you're right. I'll try it.
Right.
Bam.
Surrendered to the possibility.
Yeah. And so he finally gives up, and I'm eager. I get kind of curious to what I wish we knew exactly what that conversation or how that conversation went to see what exactly made him change his mind. And I could assume, that's you've gone this long with it. You've traveled all this way. The worst that happens is you keep living like you were living yesterday. You know, compared to most people with leprosy, Naaman's got it made.
Yeah.
Naaman's got it good because he does have these people around him, which is odd to see because not a lot of people would go around lepers. I think the first time we really heard much about people, somebody going to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but going to and actually placing hands on lepers was when Jesus came.
Yeah, you're right. And you're thinking of Israel. You're thinking of the Jews. Um, the Jews have knowledge that the rest of the world doesn't because it came straight from God. The problem with skin diseases like leprosy and how you have to deal with them came straight from God. The Syrians didn't have that information. So you're right, these people close to Laman were risking infection, but they didn't know that because they didn't get the warnings that God had given his people of how you have to deal with leprosy to make sure that it doesn't spread. So, literally, in this case, Naaman's got it made because his people are ignorant to the dangers of the infection of leprosy.
Yeah.
But Israel isn't because God has warned them, and His law. Here's how you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something the whole world knew. It was something God's people knew.
Right. And it was for Naaman, it was just the obedience that was needed for this to be pulled off. And once he was fully obedient, it was in his obedience that he was blessed.
Yeah.
So he finally shows a little bit of faith. He finally says, "You know what? You're right. I'll go see what happens." So he goes, dips 7 times in the Jordan. I can't imagine, like, in his mind that he's really happy about it, but he's still doing it. And then we see that when he came up out of the Jordan, he put his clothes on. He went back to see the prophet, and he was mad with Elisha in the beginning. But when he was cleansed, his anger was all gone as well. Not only his leprosy, but his anger too, right? Imagine that. So Naaman wanted to pay Elisha. Here's where we get the salvation. You can't put a price on salvation, right? He wanted to pay Elisha. Naaman wanted to give money for his cure, right? Remember, he brought all this money with him. And he's like, this should take care of it. And Elisha's like, no, that's not needed here. That's not how you got cured. It's not the amount of money you have, and we that's when we see, the Lord doesn't charge anything to save you. So I think it had that prophet taken the money. And I think the prophet knew too that it would have spoiled the story of grace if the prophet had been like, okay, yeah, sure. God did this, but you can pay me for it. That's not the kind of prophet that Elisha was. And instead, in Isaiah 55:1, it says salvation is without money and without price. And the prophet Elisha, he refused to take anything. You know, I, and I can imagine too, even in the midst of having to deal with all that, I don't think anybody rejoiced more than Elisha did
Right?
to see that actually unfold and then see Naaman take that step into the water. He got
Well,
to see God's words all come to life right in front
right.
of him.
And what became of because he was healed, what Naaman says is what makes us rejoice for sure. Because Naaman, as when he came back to Elisha, Naaman says, indeed, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Now, therefore, please take a gift from your servant.
Hmm.
So he knows that the God of Israel is the one true God. He is the only God. This healing made him know that. Now, like you see, he hasn't quite gotten, even though he now believes in God, he still doesn't understand how it works.
Right.
So he still wants to offer a gift. And that's where Elisha comes in and says, I can take nothing for this because your salvation is free. Knowing that the God of Israel is the one true God of the world is free. And this is what it took for you to understand that. So I mean, Naaman, after that, it's impressive even that he says, okay, so I have to go into this temple with my king. And when I bow to that false God, don't hold it against me because I know there's one
Hmm.
true God.
Well, and
and Elisha just says, "Go in peace." So, I mean, that's amazing. He's caught in a spot where he's like, "I'm still in this world where idols are worshipped and everything, and there's still some expectation, and if I bow, I'm not bowing to this false god.
right.
So don't hold that against me."
Well, and really focus on the simple word here. I know.
Yeah,
Really focus on I know
right.
there is the God. He's not saying I think. He says I know there is a God who has power to cleanse leprosy. And I that kind of hit me because there's been so many times where I'm like, I think that was God. I mean, that had to have been God. And even in that statement, that had to have been,
Yeah,
still leaves room for confusion. It still leaves room for un being unsure.
yeah,
But not with Naaman. Not when he finally listened. His servant got through to him, and he's like, you know what, I am already here. I might as well try it. There's a little bit of faith, and we read in the Bible all it takes is a mustard seed. The faith the size of a mustard seed. That's all it takes. Something this big. If you've ever seen one, they're really tiny. And the doors opened, and he walks away saying, "I know there's a God that can cleanse leprosy." And to think he only left one thing, even after all the um, attempts to leave a gift or pay the prophet or leave something in turn for his cleansing. He only left one thing in Samaria, and that was his leprosy.
yeah,
The only thing God wants us to leave with him is our sin. That's it. He doesn't want us to earn our way into it. He doesn't want us to try and say that we finally climbed this mountain to get this gift. It's a gift. The only thing he wants in return or in exchange is put down our sin, lay it at his feet. That's all he wants. That's what he wants us to leave with him is our sin. Yet the only thing, yet it is the only thing you seem to not care about giving up. In this book, it adds, it's the only thing you seem to not care about giving up, and it's so true because much like Naaman, at first he didn't realize it wasn't what he could give, it's what he could give up.
right,
The self pride, the reputation, the idea that he did something to deserve it or earn it or pay for it even. And I think we do the same thing today. We'll go and we'll say, you know what, I want to start my faith by believing there is a God, but I don't want to give up this lifestyle of mine to chase God. And then even I think that even falls off in steps
yeah,
because even the more we become a part of the church, the more we still want to hold on to certain um, sins and then say, oh, well, I'm not ready to give those up yet. Well, if you're not ready to give those up yet, you're not ready to dip in the Jordan
right,
and be cleansed.
right,
And it wasn't until Naaman was fully ready to follow those directions, meaning submit
right,
and obey in with the faith that he very well could come out cleansed. He wasn't going to do it. He wasn't ready. He wasn't going to get in. And I think even had he gone in with a half a mind, I don't know what would have happened because that's the message that God gave the prophet. Dip 7 times in the Jordan and you'll be cleansed. He's not saying dip 7 times with great faith and do it wholeheartedly. It's this sign of God's works. If you don't believe now, you're going to believe when you come out of that water. So it doesn't matter how you do it, just get in. But that pride kind of stopped him. that fear of laying down his pride, much like it's saying, the one thing we don't care to give up is our sin. And there's so many out there we could say, well, I gave up the worst of them, but not these ones that, kind of don't matter in my book. But what is God saying? What's the message that God's giving you in here? Because the message he was giving Naaman was simply just to go dip 7 times in the Jordan. There were so many other factors that he was focusing on that had nothing to do with the task at hand, what he was instructed to do. How he was greeted had nothing to do with his outcome. Who would come out to talk to him had nothing to do with his outcome. But that was the main focus. Prophet wouldn't come see me, the king wouldn't come see me. Instead, one turns me away, one sends his servant out to relay a message, and I'm just going to leave. If I'm not going to get the respect I deserve, I'm just going to leave. All that almost cost him being healed. So it's not about where the message comes from, it's the message at hand. And are we going to obey it? And I think that's the big takeaway from Naaman's story here. And luckily, I'm kind of happy that we got this done within a part one, part two kind of deal. We see part one, a lot of stubbornness. We see part two, being a lot of contemplation, and then finally surrendering, laying it down. And in turn, his obedience cured him. And he came out faithful, knowing for a fact that this could not have happened in any other way but God.
Right.
Steve, do you have anything to add on that there?
No, I think you're right. That's it. God knew what Naaman needed for him to hear the call and answer and lay down his life. And it was the healing of his leprosy. And he made a way. It was a over the river and through the woods kind of journey to get there. But God made that way. And Naaman finally understood, like you said, he was about what he had to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And just like with Jesus, the transaction of Jesus on the cross, where he took all of our sin, all of it, and gives us his righteousness as long as we accept that transaction. We've just won the most lopsided transaction in history.
Yeah.
Like you said, we look at it through our eyes of it's something that we have to give up. Sin is something, if we weren't thinking right, if we weren't fallen people, sin is something we would be anxiously trying to get rid of on our own.
Oh yeah.
But Jesus is the one that opens our eyes and says, I've already taken it. I've already paid for
Yeah.
it. It's already gone. Stop wallowing in it because I've got it. You can have my righteousness if you just answer the if you just have faith.
Yeah. So, and that really reminds me too of all these times, we find ourselves struggling with something and we're like, man, I just wish something could just take it away.
It's
Well, it,
gone.
it can.
It's
It
already gone.
can. It's already gone. We
It's
just
already
got to
been paid
lay
for.
it down.
Yeah.
So if we learn anything from this story here, my challenge to everybody is simply just to have faith, obey, and surrender, and know, much like Naaman, that God can and God will.
Yes.
So, amen. And we thank you for joining us today. Join us again next week as we start in the story of Nehemiah. So that one will be pretty interesting. Um, but yeah, join us next week as we start in with a new story here, a new man of the Bible. And we thank you for joining us today, and God bless.